Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Taisis Dibra Maschel Yeser Al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we could see what Taisis is coming to explain. So in the Gemara we asked, why does the Brisa, after mentioning the two examples of Rosh Hashanah, why does it conclude and say, Zuhi Rosh Hashanah, this is a Rosh Hashanah? And we answered, it's coming to say, this is a Rosh Hashanah, but not the case of Rabbi Yehuda. And then we quoted the Brisa with the teaching in the case of Rabbi Yehuda. And it says over there that Yeser Al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda. It's the second part of a Brisa, and it says more than what Rabbi Yehuda said in the first part of the Brisa. He holds even more than this. That if somebody has two houses, one on each side of the Rosh Hashanah, the area in between, since there are two walls, is the Rosh Hashanah, and all he now needs is an indication that's the Rosh Hashanah, and he could accomplish that either with a lechi on each side of one of the houses, which is a post, or a kaira, a beam, across each side of the houses. So the point that we brought out over here is that Rabbi Yehuda holds that two walls alone is a Rosh Hashanah, and that's what the Bryce is coming to exclude when it says Zui Rosh Hashanah. This is a Rosh Hashanah, the cases that we mentioned, but not this case of Rabbi Yehuda. So this is the part of the Gemara, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that two walls alone creates a Rosh Hashanah. This is the part of the Gemara that Tosfos is coming to explain and focus on. So let's see the general outline of Tosfos. In the Gemara we said that when the Brisa says Zui Rosh Hashanah, it comes to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda where it says Yeser Al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda. That the case is in the Brisa Rosh Hashanah, but not the case of Rabbi Yehuda. So there's three parts to Tosfos. Number one, Tosfos will quote the whole teaching and explain what's Yeser Al Kain. In the Gemara we only presented the second part of the Brisa, where Rabbi Yehuda says more than what he said in the first part of the Brisa. So Tosfos is going to quote the first part of the Brisa and then explain to us what is more, what is greater in the point that Rabbi Yehuda is making in the second part of the Brisa over what he said in the first part of the Brisa. Number two, Tosfos will ask why we didn't present a Mishnah where Rabbi Yehuda seems to say the same thing. In our Gemara we presented a Brisa. Yeser Al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda is a quote from a Brisa. The question is, why did we quote a Brisa if there seems to be a Mishnah where Rabbi Yehuda says the same exact thing? And if we have a choice between quoting a Brisa or a Mishnah, we go with the Mishnah. So why is it that our Gemara rejected the Mishnah and chose to present the Brisa instead? And number three, Tosfos will ask that Rabbi Yehuda is already excluded from the Seifa. In the Seifa of our Brisa, it says, Ezuhi Rosh Hashanah, what's a Rosh Hashanah? And one of the examples is Muvayis HaMufalashim, roads that are open at both ends. So already from there we see that the Brisa disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda would say that's a Rosh Hashanah, since there are houses lined along the road. And if there are two walls, the area is a Rosh Hashanah. The Brisa tells us that it's a Rosh Hashanah. So already from there, from the case presented as a Rosh Hashanah, we know to exclude Rabbi Yehuda. So why do we need extra words, Zuhi Rosh Hashanah, to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? So let's see Tosfos now in the flowchart form. In the Gemara we said, Yeser Al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said more than this, and we presented the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that two walls is enough to turn an area into Rosh Hashanah. So Tosfos tells us where this is found, this teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, and he says it says in the Tosefta of Perek Erev, and that's where it's found. And what's the ratio of this teaching? Rabbi Yehuda holds that a person may carry under a bridge, a mazalium, or Rosh Hashanah with a roof. The first part of the Brisa is Rabbi Yehuda tells us that any Rosh Hashanah that has a roof over it now turns into Rosh Hashanah, and a person can carry under that area more than 4 amas. And in continuation to that, it says, Yeser Al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said even more than this. And then it presents the case that 2 houses is enough to create a Rosh Hashanah, and all that's needed is an Eruv. And now Tosfos explains what's the Chiddush in the second case over the first case. The Chiddush is, what's more about this is that even though we cannot say Pi Tikra Yered V'Seisim, the reason why when there's a bridge it turns the area into Rosh Hashanah is because we say Pi Tikra Yered V'Seisim. Like, for example, by a bridge, we have the 2 walls of the bridge. So we say, since there's a bridge on top of this area, we look at it as if Pi Tikra Yered V'Seisim. The sides of the roof, they go down and they close it off. So we see it as if there are 4 walls. And that's the Chiddush in the second case of Rabbi Yehuda over the first one. What's more about that is that even though we cannot say Pi Tikra Yered V'Seisim and create 4 walls, still in all it's a Rosh Hashanah, since Rabbi Yehuda holds that 2 walls make a Rosh Hashanah. So that's what we bring down from the Brisa, the second case, where Rabbi Yehuda says that 2 walls makes a Rosh Hashanah, and that's the advantage over the first case, because in the first case, it's actually that we have 4 walls through Pi Tikra Yered V'Seisim. So that's the first part of Tosfos, where he presents where the Brisa is found, presents the Reisha, and explains to us what's the Chiddush of the Seifa. And the Chiddush is that Rabbi Yehuda is saying over there specifically that 2 walls is enough to make an area into Rosh Hashanah. Now we move on to the second part of Tosfos, where Tosfos asks, why don't we bring here the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah where he says one may make an Eruv for a Mavim Mefulish. We have a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says a person's allowed to make an Eruv Ma'arvin L'Mavim Mefulish. That means you could have a Mavim Mefulish, a road that's open at both ends, Rabbi Yehuda says you can make an Erev and carry there. So already there we see in a Mishnah, which is preferable to a Brisa, that 2 walls makes an area into Rosh Hashanah. So why did we choose the Brisa over the Mishnah? And Tosfos gives 2 answers. The first answer is that we can say it means that he makes it Tzuras of Pesach and he holds that 3 walls is enough Minatera. In the Mishnah, it just uses the general term Ma'arvim. We make an area of it. It doesn't specify how. In the Brisa it says through a Lechi or just through a Keira. In the Mishnah it says broadly Ma'arvim. So we can interpret it that it's referring to making it Tzuras of Pesach, the form or shape of a door. And that would be considered an actual wall. So from the Mishnah, we wouldn't see the Rabbi Yehuda saying 2 walls makes a Rosh Hashanah. We could interpret it to mean that 3 walls makes a Rosh Hashanah. And that's why we chose the Brisa, where it specifies clearly that a Lechi alone or a Keira alone is enough, and a Lechi or Keira are not a wall. So from there specifically do we see the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that 2 walls is enough to make an area from a Rosh Hashanah into a Rosh Hashanah. The second answer of Tosfos is Inami, or also, or we would say that that's by a road that the Rabbim doesn't pass through. From the Mishnah, we could interpret it to be referring to a Maveh Mefulish She'ina Rabbim Baikin Bay. The public doesn't use on a significant level. So such an area, 2 walls could turn into a Rosh Hashanah. But we wouldn't know that a Maveh Mefulish that the Rabbim use significantly, even there, 2 walls could turn into a Rosh Hashanah. And that's why we bring the Brisa, because our Brisa is even by a complete Rosh Hashanah that the public do pass through. So both these answers really get across the same point. And that is that specifically in the Brisa that we find clearly the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that 2 walls will turn any Rosh Hashanah into a Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah, however, we can interpret to be referring to 3 walls, or we could be interpreted to be referring to a specific type of Maveh Mefulish. Only the Brisa brings out that it's 2 walls, we don't need anything more than 2 walls, and it will be successful at turning any area, even a complete Rosh Hashanah, into a Rosh Hashanah by having those 2 walls. Now this second answer of Tosfos is going to have somewhat extensive discussion related to it, and Tosfos is going to quote, and we're going to bring down from 3 places in Eruvin that's also brought down in this Tosfos in general. One is on Daf Vav and Beis, one is from Daf Yudam and Aleph, and another is from Daf Tzaddik Hey and Aleph. So we're going to try to just focus on the parts of Eruvin that are relevant and needed for this Tosfos, so the flow of the Tosfos and an understanding of Tosfos. But over here we already have the 2 answers, and now Tosfos addresses a question on the second answer. Before we do that, we'll just show what are the 2 examples of this Rosh Hashanah, one that the Rabbim don't pass through, and the one that they do. And this is taken from the Tosfos in Eruvin on Davav and Beis. So here we have a Maveh Mefulish She'ena Rabbim Baikin Bay. They don't use significantly. Like we can see, there are 2 roads parallel to one another. Those are used much more significantly by the public. It's just in order to navigate from one to the other that the public will use the Maveh Mefulish in between. But it's not used extensively like an actual Rosh Hashanah. A Rosh Hashanah, Sharabim Baikin Bay, an example we have over here, is for instance if there are 2 public plazas, and in order to navigate from one to the other, it's necessary to pass through the Maveh Mefulish. That will be used extensively and much more by the public. So those are just the 2 images to see what are the 2 examples of a Rosh Hashanah, a Maveh Mefulish She'ena Rabbim Baikin Bay, and a Maveh Mefulish Sharabim Baikin Bay. Now Tosfos addresses and answers a question. And even though from Eruvin it seems that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the road cannot be wider than 13 1/3 amos, we're saying that from the Brisa we see that under all circumstances, any Rosh Hashanah, once there are 2 walls, it turns into a Rosh Hashanah. But it seems from Eruvin that there is a restriction, that it has to be less than 13 1/3 amos. So Tosfos says, and he'll support this in a moment, this is only midrabanan. B'minatera it can be 16 amos. That's only midrabanan that it has to be less than 13 1/3 amos. But minatera it can be 16 amos. However, there are 2 points over here that need to be addressed. Number 1 is to prove this, that it's only midrabanan, but minatera any Rosh Hashanah turns into Rosh Hashanah. Another point that needs to be addressed is the bottom line is that there is a Rosh Hashanah, even if it's just midrabanan, but there is a Rosh Hashanah that 2 walls doesn't turn into Rosh Hashanah. So how do we see from Rabbi Yehuda that 2 walls is always successful at turning Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah? So that will be explained in the next arrow, as well. We'll wrap it up after we're done this piece. Because Rabbi Yehuda definitely holds his opinion even by a complete Rosh Hashanah that the public passes through, as I already proved in Eruvin. Tosfos is saying that it cannot be that if it's not going to be less than 13 1/3 amos, Rabbi Yehuda is going to hold that the area is not a Rosh Hashanah even in a Torah. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that even by a complete Rosh Hashanah, we're talking about less than 13 1/3 amos, but the public uses. So it's important to understand this part of Tosfos, to understand that there is no difference between a Rosh Hashanah that's 16 amos wide and one that's less than 13 1/3 amos wide, but the public use extensively. So since by this Rosh Hashanah that's less than 13 1/3 amos wide, but the public use extensively, still Rabbi Yehuda holds 2 walls makes a Rosh Hashanah, so it must be that when we say that it has to be less than 13 and a third amas, meaning that 16 amas won't be a Rosh Hashanah, it has to be that that's only midrabanan. Minatera, it will definitely be a Rosh Hashanah because they're the same level of Rosh Hashanah, whether it's 16 amas or less than 13 and a third, and used extensively by the public. Now, there's a question that's over here. So why is this case of 16 amas? Why does it not turn to Rosh Hashanah through two walls? That's not explained here in Tosfos. The part that we need to know here for Tosfos are 2 points. Number one, that the Mishnah could be referring to a Mavim Mefulish that the Rabbim don't use extensively, and the Brisa is referring to a Mavim Mefulish that they do use extensively. That's point number one. Point number two is that Tosfos says that he proved this in Eruvin, that it's referring to a Rishus, a Mavim Mefulish that they use extensively, and that type of Rosh Hashanah is 100% the Rosh Hashanah, and it's on par as being a Rosh Hashanah as one that's 16 amas wide. So the point that we get over here is that even though it's a full-fledged, complete and total Rosh Hashanah, still Rabbi Yehuda holds two walls turns into Rosh Hashanah, and that's where we bring the Brisa, because from the Brisa we see clearly the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that even if it's just two walls, it'll turn any Rosh Hashanah, even a full-fledged, complete and total Rosh Hashanah, into a Rosh Hashanah. So with that we finish the second part of Tosfos, which is basically really just bringing out that the Brisa specifically brings out that two walls is enough. We can't interpret it to be more referring to more than two walls. So number one, it's only two walls and not more. And number two, it works for any and all Rosh Hashanah, even a complete and total Rosh Hashanah. If there's two walls, it'll become a Rosh Hashanah. So there we see the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda articulated very clearly that two walls will turn any area into a Rosh Hashanah. And now we'll move on to the last part of Tosfos, the third part of Tosfos, which is a question, which we'll see at the end, changes our understanding of the Gemara. Tosfos asks, we already know to exclude Rabbi Yehuda from the Seifa that says, Muvayisam Fulashim are Rosh Hashanah. In the Seifa we say, Ezehu Rosh Hashanah. And one of the answers is, one of the examples is, Muvayisam Fulashim, roads that are open at both ends. So already from there we know that we don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda, because the Brisa says that a road that's open at both ends is a Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Yehuda says that that's a Rosh Hashanah, since it's lined with houses, so it has a wall on each side. So why do we need the words Zui Rosh Hashanah to exclude Rabbi Yehuda? He's already excluded from the Seifa. So Tosfos answers, and it's an answer that consists of an answer, then an arrow that points upwards and downwards to the completing of the answer. We could say, and we'll explain it more fully after we're done, we could say that Rabbi Yehuda holds the Lechi and Keira is considered a wall. How can we say this? So that's the arrow, since there's an opinion that that's a mechitza. And that's why it says Zui Rosh Hashanah to teach that it's not a wall. So first we'll explain what Tosfos says, and then we'll show how that affects and changes our understanding of the Gemara. What Tosfos is saying here is that when it says Zui Rosh Hashanah, it's not excluding that a Mavim Mefulish is not a Rosh Hashanah, because that we already know from the Seifa. What it's excluding is that don't think that if there's a Mavim Mefulish that is lined with houses, so it has two walls, if one just adds a lechi on each side or a kaira on each side, it'll become a Rosh Hashanah because the lechi or kaira are considered to be a wall. So now it has the walls and the requirements of Rosh Hashanah. Zui Rosh Hashanah. These cases, says the Brisa, are Rosh Hashanah. The examples that we mentioned, but not this one. The reason is because the Brisa disagrees and holds that the lechi or kaira are not capable of turning the area to have more than two walls, to have 3 or 4 walls. So it changes here, based on Tosfos, that we didn't learn in the Gemara originally. In the Gemara we thought that Zui Rosh Hashanah is excluding the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that 2 walls makes a Rosh Hashanah. Now we're saying that we already know from the Seifa. What the words Zui Rosh Hashanah are excluding is that if there are 2 walls and we want to accomplish to complete the walls through a lechi or kaira, we're not able to do that, since the Brisa disagrees and holds that a lechi and kaira cannot be considered to create extra walls. Another point that changes over here is that we're not actually excluding Rabbi Yehuda. We're excluding a mistaken interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda himself actually holds that the lechi and kaira do not serve to complete the walls. Rabbi Yehuda holds 2 walls make a Rosh Hashanah, like we explained extensively. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the lechi and kaira are only there as a sign. It's excluding a mistaken interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda, that the lechi and kaira serve to make more walls. And the Brisa is saying that according to that mistaken interpretation, we disagree with it, because we hold that a lechi and kaira, the 4th tan of the Brisa, is not able to complete walls and make additional walls to the area. So to summarize the Tosfos, we brought where the source of Yeser al-Kain is, and we explained what's the Yeser al-Kain over the previous case, that it's referring to that even just 2 walls alone will turn into Rosh Hashanah. We then asked, why did we bring the Brisa, not a Mishnah? And the basic answer was that specifically the Brisa brings out that 2 walls will turn any area into Rosh Hashanah. And then we asked, why do we need the words Zui Rishus HaYachid if Rabbi Yehuda is excluded from the Seifa? And we answered, that's true, Rabbi Yehuda is excluded from the Seifa. Zui Rishus HaYachid is coming to exclude a mistaken interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda, that even that interpretation the Brisa rejects, because the Brisa holds that Alechi or Kaira are not able to complete the walls of an area and turn it into a Rishus HaYachid.